Welcome, everyone, to the Homebody Cafe podcast. This is your host, Professor Hannah speaking. I don't believe I had the opportunity to explain what THC Podcast is about. THC stands for the Homebody Cafe, which is actually a dub that I received as a nickname from my former students, namely Sienna, who was from the Philippines, and Miran from South Korea. I was actually nicknamed the Homebody Teacher. And the word cafe came from our discussion topics back on my previous job called Hollow. And my students were telling me how having a conversation with me, especially conversation practice, tied into like meeting a friend in a cafe that you haven't seen in a long time. So thus came the name, the Homebody Cafe, because I am basically streaming from home. And I like the whole idea of just just teaching while in the comfort of my own home, for example. It's really nice. And of course, something about this whole approach of just conversations coming from, in a very informal approach seems to, I don't know, help my students at the time become more vocal. So I think that's what stuck with me, and that's why I stuck with the name THC. So the Homebody Cafe is just a small allusion to my previous job. So to this day, it's still quite meaningful, and I'm glad I get to keep the name THC. That being said, THC Podcast is basically a linguistic-focused podcast that addresses everything and anything related to linguistics, but also education. So a lot of these topics are relating to my field of expertise and also addressing with what's going on in terms of education, especially in SLA or LA would be better. SLA stands for Second Language Acquisition, which we'll talk about more later, and language acquisition just as a whole, LA. Since that is my interest, I think I will be pursuing more topics of the language acquisition aspect of linguistics in this podcast, but of course, I'm more than happy to address other fields of linguistics. So, coming back to why did I make this podcast? So, the reason why I made this podcast is because I really enjoyed my teaching style from Hollow, which was formerly known as a live stream teaching kind of format. So, back in the day, teachers would be streaming, attending, like a lot of students would attend a live stream and basically the teacher's teaching. And I really enjoyed that kind of format, and it just stuck with me for the past 4 years, I would say, because Hollow blew up sometime during COVID. I also wanted to pursue live stream teaching through YouTube and other different formats. But eventually, over time, when I kept streaming, I realized that a lot of my live stream teaching embodied the podcast style of approach. So from that point on, I just started pursuing more of a podcast style, hence THC Podcast. Another thing to talk about, I don't believe I introduced myself. This feels kind of backwards considering that the first two episodes we just jump right straight into the topics that we're discussing. So I wanted to pause and highlight some things about myself and expectations for this podcast so that, from henceforth, a lot of the guests in the future who I will invite to this live stream will be addressing things in linguistics and education. So brief thing about me, my name is Hannah. I dub myself the Professor Hannah because I have my master's degree in linguistics with an emphasis in TESOL. So my field of specialty specifically addresses English and how to learn the English language. But also, some of my interest in terms of linguistics stems from language acquisition as a whole, considering that I am a multi-learning student when it comes to languages. So I'm very fascinated with how people are able to learn a language, especially this whole discourse about trying to learn language fast, which is a popular trend that's happening on YouTube whenever we address about learning a language. It's all about how fast can you learn a language. But of course, I will talk more about that in future podcasts or videos because that's something I want to explore myself regarding language acquisition. And Speaking of which, I will go into more details of my interest in linguistics in the first question. But first, let's address what this podcast will entail. So, regarding today's podcast, it is called Crash Course in Linguistics. So, this podcast will be linguistic heavy. I will be focusing more on what is linguistics, what fields are in linguistics, addressing basically the core fundamentals of linguistics. For now, of course, I can't really vocalize a lot of detail because linguistics is very vast, especially when you get into the whole niche of it. And I'll be honest and admit that there are some like core, not core, but there are some fields in linguistics where I don't feel as confident. Like, for example, whenever Norman is with me in stream, I'm more confident when he's around when we talk about phonology because phonology is his field. I did really poorly in phonology, even though it was something I was very interested in. So that being said, it's nice to always hear from the expert who really enjoys a specific field. As for myself, I really enjoyed syntax. So anything with building words, understanding how words are put together, syntax is my expertise. I really love that. So with that being said, I guess we'll go ahead and jump to the first question, which is, how did you get into linguistics?
Yeah, so
yeah.
How did you get into linguistics, Hannah? I also just to kind of introduce myself to everyone. Hello, I'm Justin Zalameda, and I kind of help with Hannah on this podcast as well as just her general marketing. So I'm here to help her with the podcast and kind of facilitate some of the questions too, and maybe get some insights that you guys might have never learned about linguistics. Because I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about linguistics before meeting Hannah. So Hannah, how did you get into linguistics?
Oh, so this feels like I'm gonna dive straight into my lore right now. So, linguistics, honestly, I didn't even think about it when I was young or when I went to college. Never thought about it as a field. It was actually kind of serendipitous, I would say, because I pursued English after things didn't work out with nursing after high school. So after high school, I pursued nursing. Nursing didn't work out. I went back to school, community college, and I looked into English. And at the time, I was thinking about, okay, because not used to, but I still like to write stories as a hobby because I feel like I really love expressing myself through words. So something about expression and words really resonated with me, and I pursued the whole route of English. And then my friends were all telling me, you should try education because that's always the safe option. So I pursued education. And I realized I actually really hated English. And it's kind of funny because that was scary for me too. Like, you have to understand, I was 18, I was like 18, 19, and I was like, okay, nursing didn't work out for me. My whole world literally crashed around me when that didn't work out. I pursued English, and now that I was in this place where I was going to become an educator of English, I was like, oh my God, I don't like English. Like, this is kind of scary. Why did I spend my first 2 years in like community college pursuing it in the first place? So that was like a really scary moment for myself until one of my online friends. So one of my online friends I met through writing stories online, and basically this friend reached out to me and she was all like, why don't you try teaching English in Indonesia? And I was like, really? And she's like, yeah, just try it. It never hurts, right? Like, you can just go there for figuring out if it's something that you like or you don't. So I thought about it. I was like, okay, I guess it wouldn't really hurt to move abroad for 6 months. So I picked studying abroad for 6 months in Indonesia, and I was placed in Tangerang. And I learned very quickly. I really loved teaching English as a language, and that's when I found out linguistics was something for me. So I started to ask questions when I came back from my internship, and I was thinking, okay, well, what is something that's relating to language learning? Because that's all I knew. I didn't know the word linguistics. So I found out later, I was like, oh, apparently, if I pursue languages, it's tied into a program that's called English Education, Emphasis in Language and Linguistics. And I was like, that's the first time I was introduced to linguistics. And I was like, oh. And I used to think about it. I was like, is linguistics not under the same category of English itself? And someone told me, no, they're not the same thing. Because if you think about English, it's all about analysis of literature related to English, the history of English. And yes, they overlap with linguistics, but English is going to be focused more on English. The rhetoric, the way it's written, the way a message or how to write a certain essay, your voice, public speaking, they're just all going to overlap with each other because it's humanities, right?
So more for like comprehension more than anything else then, right? Or
yes,
okay,
that's correct. So it's like comprehension and it's also analysis too, because a lot of the times when you go to English courses or English classes as you get into higher level, it's not just grammar anymore. You're talking about how to analyze, like what are they saying, how do they use their voice like this. That's college level when you get into those courses. Yeah.
I see.
And if you take AP classes, they do try to get you into that. I feel like I was so confused when I took AP during middle school, not middle school, during high school, because I took AP literature in my junior year and my senior year, and I was so confused because I didn't understand what they were trying to teach me. So once when I was older and I started to see a new lens of it, I was like, oh my God, I would have gotten an easy A if I actually asked for help. Like I wasn't understanding what I was learning back then, but now it's like, oh my God, it's a new world for me. So that's why they were telling me if you pursue English as a field, it's not the same as linguistics, but they do use some of the same core values, which is grammar is going to overlap, phonology is going to overlap, teaching pedagogy is going to overlap because linguistics has that pedagogy approach as well. So linguistics is very vast, and of course, once I got into linguistics after I finished my bachelor's degree, again, it was just like amazing. I did not know there was a world like this, and I think I'm quite fortunate because I basically took a risk picking up a new field without really understanding what I was getting myself into, you know? So when I picked up linguistics as like my emphasis, so basically it's like a minor in a sense for my English ed program, I only took like maybe a few, actually not few, maybe like 5, maybe half of the requirements were related to linguistics. Like there were courses of the 2 most important ones, phonology and syntax. Like that was mandatory. You had to take those 2 if you're a linguistics major. But for my field at the time, it was one or the other. I didn't have to take both of them. And then once I got into the linguistics program, they were telling me you were also missing a prerequisite class, which is 170. 170 is basically the 101 class, the introduction to linguistics. So it's kind of funny because when I think about my undergrad program, I basically skipped all the beginner intro classes and jumped straight into the much more advanced classes when I think about it. I struggled, but I mean, I was able to keep up with it because it was just so interesting, you know?
Yeah, I see. That's good. No, I mean, it's interesting though, because I didn't know anything about linguistics. I don't really know English. I think I don't know English that well, even as like learning it in English classes and stuff. So it's really interesting that this is where you kind of found yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was just the science behind pedagogy, how to teach it, really fascinated me because there's a lot of like meta awareness, you know? So I think that's what got me really hooked into it was like the whole reflective aspect of, okay, what does a teacher do to make you feel something? Or how to make a teacher inspire you to work or stuff like that. It just really made you, at least from my perspective, it made me feel like being a teacher is like a lot being like an actor. You're a performer because your job is to show your interest in the language. And of course, when people meet someone who's very passionate about a subject, more often than not, it hooks people's attention because they talk more quickly. Like for me, for example, I get excited. When I get excited, I talk very quickly. And I feel more passionate about expressing myself through my fields. And of course, having teachers who are very passionate in their fields made me, of course, inspire me and influence me in a way that I wanted to get to know more about the subject that made them feel that way. I think something that always comes back to me whenever I think about linguistics and also my experience in Indonesia, it's a light bulb moment. It's the moment you see something clicks. You see it in their eyes, you know? I see it in the teachers who are passionate about education, teaching other future teachers who are going to become teachers. I see it in my students who understand the English language and are able to make that connection. I see it in myself. When I'm learning another language or when I'm analyzing like Spy Family with my other friends, it's that moment of just, oh my God, like the realization. that's what hooks me into linguistics. And I hope that I can carry on that experience, at least for my students, when I talk about it,
Yeah,
especially in this
definitely.
podcast.
Definitely. I think it's just lacking in a lot of things today. I mean, a lot of people are kind of just doing things just to do things and not necessarily finding what their passion is. And granted, it takes a lot to find what your passion is. Because sometimes it takes people to try several different things for them to even to realize like, okay, this is actually what I love doing. And oftentimes too, I think people think that one passion is something that they need to do for the rest of their lives. And often I've realized and I've seen passions change. People change.
Yes.
Just as you get older, your interests will change. And so I think it's always going to be something that's going to be molded and changed and created over time as basically we all go through our own lives and experience different things.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with that. I can vouch from my firsthand experience that, as you get older, your priority is constantly going to shift. It's going to battle with each other. It's going to make you decide which one are you going to sacrifice, which one are you going to prioritize, all that stuff. So passions really come down to a lot of the times people want to work on their passions, like if they could make their passions into a job, that's wonderful. But also there's a caveat for pursuing your passions, because sometimes when you're so focused on your passion, you start to hate what you love, and it happens.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective on that, because I used to do that with photography. Like I used to love photography and the art of it, turned it into a profession at some point, and I found that I didn't like having my passion be a job. I didn't like it like
Yes.
that. And I turned it into that. And I know now with photography there are so many different ways to make it into something that you all are able to work the art that you love to do and monetize off of it. And for me, I like the art way more than actually just wanting to make money off of it. So I actually had stopped it completely. I still have all my equipment and stuff. It's just not something that I found interest in. And so that kind of like what I was going back to earlier. Interests will change, passions will change, and I think a lot
Yeah,
of us just
absolutely.
need to be okay with that.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with that. Like sometimes, like we Justin said, sometimes you come to that realization that when you pursue your passion, it's only when you pursue it you realize it's not what you wanted. It's experience that you have to let yourself go through, and also to understand, like, if that passion is worth it, if it defines you, if it makes you feel alive, or it gives meaning to your life, then yeah, pursue it if it makes you feel that way. Um, but of course, there's always a gain and there's a loss. Like, again, there's always a caveat for pursuing your passion. Sometimes you might start to hate it, or maybe you just like the art form itself and you don't really want monetary value anymore, Because something that comes with monetary value is that there's a need for constant change. And there's this hyperfixation of, like, I don't know, at least for me, perfectionism comes in. And when
Hmm.
perfectionism comes in for me, I start to hate things, because it's like it's no longer me. It's always me trying to meet a standard that I created for myself.
Hmm.
And that
Yeah.
can feel very frustrating. I feel that way, especially for singing. So that's for me. I don't want to pursue singing as at least for, like, oh, I don't want to pursue singing for a job. I mean, it would be fun if I could, but as long as I can retain myself, like I'm not pursuing stardom or anything,
Yeah.
because I enjoy who I am when I sing, you know.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
Okay.
then as for linguistics, it's like, for me, it's different because I feel the most alive in linguistics, especially if it's a research, or it's from, I guess, monetary value. There's something to always be learned from knowledge. It's what I believe. So I feel like pursuing it gives meaning to my life. That's why this podcast is the way it is.
Yeah. Of course. All right. Makes sense. It definitely makes sense. All right. So let's go
Yeah.
on to the next question then. If you are a linguist, does that mean you must study many languages slash be a polyglot? What is a polyglot actually?
So, just to break it down, poly means for many, glot means like speaking. So, someone who's able to speak many languages
Mm,
is what it's trying to ask.
I see.
Um, so, polyglots, there's a lot of nuances on this word, because we use the word a lot, and I feel like this is something that happens in English or in conversational language. We tend to lose the real meaning of words. So, The actual definition of polyglot is someone who is able to speak many languages. So what comes with it is this ideology that this person is he or she is fluent in speaking all of these different languages, right? So when you think polyglot, you think of someone who can speak more than 3 languages. Usually it's greater than 3. Whereas if you say multilingual, which is one of the words I use more often, it's kind of taking a step back from polyglot. Polyglot would be someone who really knows many languages, able to speak it, whereas multilingual is someone who has learned many languages. It doesn't specifically indicate that this person can speak the languages really well or that they're fluent. So that's why I always tend to use the word multilingual more than polyglot. Polyglot is, yeah, so there's small nuances, and that's something I want to point out in terms of linguistics or linguists. We are very, very sensitive to word choices, mainly because linguists really study words. Like, we really care about where it comes from, the origins and stuff. So we're very careful of word choices. That's something I want to highlight. That's why I made this distinction between polyglot versus multi-language learner.
I see. So how would you be able to differentiate on like linguists and polyglots? Because you kind of said it, right? Like, you guys studied like the words specifically, but if like someone came up to you and was like, "Well, I think it's the same as being like bilingual," like how would you respond to that?
Yes, so that's a good question. There's always that Latin phrase there, poly for many, bi for two. So if there's someone who's bilingual, that means they speak 2 languages. And again, the whole assumption with bilingual is this assumption that they are a native or fluent speaker of 2 languages. Same thing with instead of saying polylingual, we say polyglot. It comes with a certain expectation that this person has some fluency in the languages that they're speaking. So they could deem themselves a polyglot. I know when I entered my pedagogy courses, my teacher even went into more details of talking about that there's actually different titles for different types of people. Like, for example, we had this conversation about the 1.5 generation, which is something I consider myself as. And a 1.5 generation speaker is someone who grew up in a different country but also has retained some of their native languages. People in a 1.5 generation are people who don't receive feedback for corrections of their native tongue. So for me, Tagalog. And basically, either this person has little comprehension or ability to speak, or they're only left with just comprehension. So that is the definition of a 1.5 generation speaker.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that. Interesting.
Yes. So there's a lot of things in linguistics. Like, we like to give different titles, different names. So that's why we're very careful of how words are being used, because it's just so to clarify there's no misunderstanding, because English is one of many languages that are very ambiguous. So ambiguity is a problem across language. So what the rule of thumb of linguistics is that we want to be as clear as possible, on the same page as possible as everyone.
I see. I see. So
yeah.
So how would you describe someone who is able to understand like the language that their parents taught them? Say in your case, Tagalog, like they are able to understand fully what their parents or other Tagalog speakers are saying, but they themselves don't know how to formulate sentences in the language itself. Like, how would a linguist describe that?
So definitely that's a 1.5 generation issue, where, yeah, so that's definitely 1.5 gen, because the thing is, for a child to be bilingual, like to be perceived as someone who's both a native and is literate of their language, first and foremost, they should be educated in that field. So, for example, if you are going to an after-school language school, where you are kind of forced to practice in that language and write, that could reinforce you being more bilingual, because not only bilingual but also biliterate, because you're not only able to speak it, which is lingual is associating with the voice, the mouth. Literate is biliterate, means you can read, but that being said, they're very specific. It doesn't mean that if someone says you're biliterate, it doesn't mean that you can speak. Like, you can at least read the words, you can comprehend it, but you're limited. You're just biliterate. You're not bilingual. Like, you can't speak it.
I see.
Yeah, so those are the small nuances when it comes to linguistics. It's just understanding like how words are used and which specific words are determining what your status is in a sense. So yeah, the more I got into linguistics, the more I realized, oh, I can't really call myself a bilingual anymore or trilingual because I'm not a trilingual. I didn't speak Spanish or I didn't speak Tagalog and English and Spanish at the same time that I have enough fluency for all of them. Like over time, I'm losing my Tagalog because I don't speak it enough, and I've also lost a large chunk of Spanish that I've acquired from high school. Like I don't even use it,
Yeah,
so
I
I can't even call myself trilingual anymore because it's not used anymore.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense. That makes sense.
I think what happens is that in terms of competition, in terms of applying for jobs, people want to know you're bilingual or you're biliterate or stuff like that. They want people who are able to speak different languages because it's a really really good skill. It might even increase some of your pay because you have that advantage over others. But I feel like it's kind of hard in terms of removing bilingual out of linguistics. It becomes more of a generalized term. That's why I'm saying ambiguity happens in English, because if you put it in linguistics, we're very specific, but outside of context, it loses its general or very specific meaning.
I see. Do you find
Yeah.
it's like common for like immigrant children? Because like I think I'm first generation here,
Yeah.
from what I understand, if I get that correct. And I find that people who are also like me, are kind of like in the same situation. Like we're like that 1.5 generation that are able to understand, or even more so, some are actually bilingual. But a
Hmm.
lot of us are in that 1.5 generation where we understand like fully like what our parents and aunts and uncles are saying,
Yes.
but they can't really convey it back. Do you find that happening quite a bit with immigrants around in the first generation?
It really depends because I think the most important factor is in terms of language acquisition. I've learned that there's something called the critical age period or the critical period,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically between the ages. Like there's been discussions of 10 years old being the issue or 13 being the issue. All I know it's before the child reaches puberty. Um, the child is able to regret or not regret regress in language if they choose that it's not important. Like for example, um, one of the interesting concepts with children and language is that something about children are able to retain patterns in ways that adult brains or matured brains, even as like beyond like maybe puberty around that age, that something about the brain just stops. There's a part in the brain that stops being active, and it's really interesting because I think neurolinguists actually studied this. And of course, I should double check and fact check myself on this because it's been a long time since I've taken a language acquisition course. But basically, neurolinguists were able to determine that a part of the brain was very active as children, and they believe or hypothesize that that is responsible for recognizing languages. It's why we have children who are able to converse. I think there was a case, I don't know if her name was Connie. There was a 5-year-old girl or 6-year-old girl who was able to converse in 6 different languages, and she was able to determine them and not get confused
Oh, that's
because
cool.
she was able to practice with multiple people who engaged with her. So, something I learned and realized in language acquisition programs is that there needs to be someone who's responsible for the language in order for the child to retain a sense of importance to it.
Yeah, and
So,
that
for
makes
example,
sense. Go ahead.
yes. But the problem with the 1.5 gen is it also depends on which era you came from. I realized this from firsthand experience because when I first came to the US, it was 1999. I wasn't enrolled into school until 2000. And during that time, the school was not very friendly to multilingual speakers. They had this whole I want you guys to focus on just speaking English. They even discouraged my parents from speaking Tagalog to me and my sister because they said it at the time. They believed that teaching more than one language would confuse the child. There was no belief that the child was able or capable of distinguishing the language. So my parents stopped talking to me and my sister in Tagalog. They would predominantly speak in English around us. Sometimes they talk in Tagalog and some I don't know how I should describe this. Like maybe different environments is what we call it in linguistics. Environments meaning like a specific reason that they would enter speaking Tagalog. Like for example, if my parents are scolding me, they will talk to me in Tagalog and Ilonggo.
Mm,
They will. That's an environment. That's when they would switch. But they were talking to me about like factual stuff, things that are just like, oh, they're giving me a lecture, they would speak in English. So that's what I mean by environment. So in the case of my sister and I, my parents were discouraged from speaking Tagalog to us because they believed that speaking in Tagalog would affect our English and our acquisition of it. So my sister, shortly after she was enrolled into preschool, she lost her Tagalog. She doesn't speak it anymore. She doesn't even remember how to speak Tagalog because probably when she was young, she made a decision that there was no point to retain Tagalog when our parents, speak English. And that's the decision of the child to make, which is kind of unfortunate and is a caveat in terms of language acquisition that if the parents don't see learning a language is important, it's going to reflect in the child, and the child's going to reflect it too.
Yeah.
So such is the case with my sister. She only understands Tagalog. She doesn't speak it anymore. She even lost her accent. Like she had a very clear accent of Tagalog when she was younger, but now whenever she talks in Tagalog, she would be like, "Makapa." She would say like, that's that famous saying like, "Makapal ng mukha mo," like your face is so thick, thick-faced. She would say, "Makapal ng mukha mo."
Oh goodness, yeah, that sounds so strange.
Yes. Versus saying makapal ng mukha mo, right? So we were very used to how we say it, if you hear it before, you know how it sounds. So, yeah, my sister can't say it anymore. She doesn't have the accent. I don't know if she wants to at this age, if she wants to be capable of getting the accent back, but she's completely lost it.
Yeah,
completely.
I mean, it sounds like just like the kids basically decided like, oh, it's not useful to me, so why should I retain it?
Exactly.
It sounds like we just do that as adults in general, and in this case, it's with language with children.
Yeah, and that's really important is that adults don't realize that, when you speak languages to your children, they are going to make a decision on it. Like, I remember when I was teaching one of my Korean students about how she wanted her children to be bilingual because she knew the importance of how English would be in South Korea. So I advised her, I was saying, okay, well, it's okay to speak Korean to your kids, but they always speak Korean in general because they are in a society where Korean is going to be the dominant. So I advised her, I was saying, it would be nice if you had opportunities where you could talk English with your children, ask them in English, have them watch English shows when they're young, because all of these output, or whatever they're going to be watching or exposing themselves to, something's gonna happen in the brain, because the brain is able to recognize the pattern of English and retain it. So I just told her, make it a habit to at least speak a little bit of English every day so that they have that retention, they understand, and they're able to speak it. That way, when they become 10 years of age and older, they would be considered bilinguals at that point because they had enough exposure to two languages. Like their mom is kind of associated as an English speaker, whereas their dad is more of the Korean speaker, where they switched to speaking Hangul. And what was actually very interesting was when my student told me that they had a neighbor who was a foreigner. They only spoke English, but the child was capable of speaking in Hangul. The kids were so excited, they started speaking English to that friend because it was a foreigner. They thought, oh, you're a foreigner, so you must speak English. So they spoke English to the kid. And the kid was able to converse with them both in English and Hangul too. So it just really shows, finding connections. Connection is a very strong way to connect or encourage someone to retain their language.
I see. Wow, that's so interesting. All right, so let's try on going on to the next question then. So,
yes,
what is linguistics? Like I was saying earlier, I really don't know what linguistics is. And I know I have a feeling you're going to ask me what it is, so that's kind of like my answer. I don't know what it is.
So nothing even like, okay, what is linguistics or what the study is about? Just kind of giving a guess, a feel for it.
I mean, I only know a little bit now after being around you for a little bit in these last few weeks, actually like last month and stuff, but I just know it's really like kind of like the study of language.
Yes.
Is that it? Did I pass?
You got it. Like, I mean, for the most part, we have to be very, again, with linguistics, we have to be very specific. And I always hear this word all the time in my linguistic fields because my teacher would always tell me like, oh, you need to be specific, you need to be more specific. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Linguistics is about being specific. So in the next page, I answer it. It's linguistics is a study of human language. So when you think of human language, the first thing that people commonly think about is spoken, which is the next one.
Yeah, I see.
So spoken is the most common that we would think of because when you say human language, how do we mainly communicate? In our society, we speak through spoken, but that's not the only way of communicating. We also have sign language, which is the next slide. Sign for people from deaf communities. We have sign language that we can refer to. So we're just addressing human language as its entirety. We're not just limiting it to just spoken. We're talking about signed for ASL. We also have another one, which is written, the next slide. And written can be like for those who are using Braille, for example, like they can't see. So they would have to resort to a Braille system. So there is a written system for those who are unable to communicate. So these are basically what encompasses what is considered a human language. So spoken, sign, and written. Yeah.
I see. Interesting. Yeah, and I know there are different forms of sign language too. I think like there's like besides the American like ASL, I think there's I know they exist. I just don't know the names of them. So they all have their own differentiations, and linguists would be able to like kind of talk about that then, right?
Yes, that's correct. So every country has their own system of sign language. So what we learn in America, ASL, is not going to be the same as British sign language, for example. BSL will be different. And then compare that to Australian sign language, I'm pretty sure they're going to have something different too. So sign language is a different field of itself. So it's still, I don't know if I should say kind of new, because I think in terms of modern linguistics, it's resurfaced in the 18th century. So we've started talking more and more about it. And I feel like it's just slowly and gradually getting more attention, especially with what I've been seeing in terms of linguistics being talked about as a subject on YouTube. Like a lot of the videos have been resurfacing as of 1 year ago or a couple of years ago, less than 5 years. So I'm really happy to see like linguistics is starting to pick up more attention because it is still kind of a young scientific field, I guess you could call it, because it's still relatively new. There's a lot of aspects, a lot of niches that have yet to be explored. Even pedagogy is still kind of fresh. We're still learning how to become better teachers. So the study or the science behind linguistics is still an ongoing process, and changes are still happening, and everything's always being updated, restudied, revisited, testing for efficiency. It's just really interesting to be in this field of just being, I guess, in other words, if you really like psychology would be, it ties into linguistics in a sense. It's just giving you that whole meta feel of it. Like what psychology gives me is like this meta awareness of myself or how people think. Linguistics does the same thing in a sense. That's why it really interests me.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So interesting.
Yeah. So with that being said, with those three branches that I mentioned, signed, spoken, signed, and written, those fields like branch out into hundreds of niches. There's so many ways you can go about it. So the fact that I mentioned three, it can expand into hundreds.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's the same with psychology too, and that's actually how I found out about the field of study that I'm in with psychology. So it's very interesting. I mean, I think that's like kind of common with any kind of science discipline that you find yourself in, that there are just so many other branches that you can go into.
Yes, absolutely. And there's just so many places you can go with it. I just feel like with a lot of the discourse that I hear in linguistics is just that, there's so many fields we have yet to explore. There's a lot of places we could definitely, need more. We need more manpower. We just don't have enough of it. Not enough people.
I see. Well, hopefully this podcast will help with that then, bring awareness to linguists and the study of language, the study of human language.
Yes, absolutely.
So
I
go ahead. Yes, please.
Oh no, I was just gonna say linguistics is it's really fun for me. I really enjoy it, and I just hope more people will jump on board with linguistics someday.
Yeah, it sounds like you really found your passion for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how would I guess going on to this slide, then this question, how do linguists approach the study of language from like a humanistic and scientific perspective?
Ooh, okay. So linguists approach the study of language from a humanistic and scientific perspective. Oh, I think this is part of the definition as well.
Okay.
So what makes linguistics very interesting is that we're seeing it from a humanistic side. So, right? So linguistics overlaps with anthropology. If you go to university, there are some students who are from anthro fields enter into linguistics because they do overlap. Anthropology is a study of human behavior. It's understanding how humans behave and why we do certain things and stuff. So that's from a humanistic standpoint, and which is why linguistics is also understanding like a little bit of how our language overlaps with anthropology. What people do reflects into language. That being said, culture is often responsible for why language is the way it's shaped, you know? So this overlaps more into social linguistics, more on sociology, and of course anthro too. In terms of scientific could be more of the meta that I was mentioning, like from a psycholinguistic stance, from a psychology stance. We do a lot of research from a scientific approach. Even our paper reflects it. APA is our format, not MLA.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yes, yes. So it's really interesting because a lot of the times our teachers actually tell us, they're like, it's okay if you do MLA, it's fine. But I find myself going more for APA. After I finished my bachelor's in English Ed, that was all MLA format papers. I branched over to APA. I felt more comfortable in APA because MLA can feel a little bit stifling in terms of how they want you to write it a certain way. Whereas APA is like, it's more organized in a sense of, okay, here's a small subtext of what this is going to be about, and this is what's going to contain in this segment. I just like the more organization of APA.
I see.
So hence linguistics is from a scientific approach as well. What makes linguistic a little bit difficult is because, again, it overlaps so much with anthro, and it's overlaps so much with psychology that even when I was finishing up my master's degree, when I was trying to propose my thesis, a lot of my questions ended up posing as psychology questions. I was like, oh. It's really hard sometimes to think of a thesis without overlapping with psychology, which is unfortunate, but it does overlap. But we have to figure out like specific things that only linguists would understand. I think that's how I perceived it.
I see.
Yeah. But they do overlap with one another. So in the next slide, you're going to see what looks like a target practice, but it's not. Basically, this is the common core. When you enter linguistics, you are going to learn the main four first, which is, well, phonology and phonetics do overlap with each other. So you're going to learn those along with morphology next, and then syntax. And then semantics and pragmatics are kind of like the upper level once you understand the basic four. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about phonetics and phonology, which is on the next slide. So phonetics and phonology is a study of speech sounds and their relations. So something to indicate again. So with linguistics, I have to highlight again the specificness of how we define words. So phonetics is the study of physiological production of speech sounds, so how sounds are being made. But phonology is the study of psychological perception of speech sounds, so they're different. Phonetics is how do we create them. Phonology is how do we hear them. That makes sense.
Interesting. So like the shape of like your tongue and the mouth, like kind of like the anatomy behind it, or is it different than that?
Yes, that underlines both for phonetics and phonology, because phonetics is understanding how can we produce the word. So exactly like you mentioned, how the mouth is moving, the tongue placement, how wide your mouth is moving as well. Those all play into physiological production of speech sounds. That's phonetics.
I see. So off topic, but kind of on topic. Do biologists or marine biologists or any kind of someone who studies animals, would they be looking into something like this too, but for that specific animal that they're studying?
I would assume yes. Okay. I'm not someone of a biology or marine biology background.
Yeah, we have a biologist in the audience. Let us know. That'd be really interesting.
That would be very interesting. I would say yes, though, because I feel like if you are a specialist in a specific animal, it's very important that you recognize the sounds of what an animal makes, because that is their language, right? Every animal has their own sounds. Like if we talk about like Norman talking about gorilla in the TFP podcast, like Gorillas have different sounds. They make ugh, ugh, or like they say the repetition. What is the sound of the spacing between words? We're entering something called discourse analysis. And basically, it's analyzing how words are, or the way that we put words to, especially for animals. Discourse analysis would be very helpful for marine biologists because they recognize what is the frequency that they use to express pain or joy. It also shows excitement too, based on the spacing. Do they talk fast or do they make the same sound, like "oog, oog, 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 oog," for example, for like for an excited? I don't know if that's even true, but just an example. If they say it like very quickly, is that a sign of excitement? The pitch, all of those stuff, I would assume, yes, marine biologists would definitely touch on studying the phonetics and the phonology of how animals would sound.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, because it's really interesting. I just feel like, again, with linguistics being such a broad topic, it is going to be visited upon different fields. So marine biologists would be one. Veterinarians probably looked into understanding the phonology of animals too, I would assume. Anyone that has anything to relate with languages or communication will most likely have to visit phonology at least once.
Oh, I see. Wow, interesting.
Yeah, because it's part of their communication, right? So I would assume that's the case.
Okay. Well, next slide then.
Okay.
Morphology,
The next
form of words.
Okay, morphology is interesting because morphology is a form of words. It's how we put words together. Like when we say g, dog, that is morphology. It's like putting words together. Oh, sorry, that's more of sound. Gog. That is phonology. My bad. Morphology is more of, in terms of English. English is such an interesting language because we have Latin words, right? We have Latin affixes. Affixes is such a fancy word for saying things that are prefix at the front of the word. We have words in the middle, and then we have words in the end. So we have morphology. This is what I learned in terms of middle school. I don't know if you took this in middle school as well, Kuya, but in my middle school, they made it mandatory that I had to memorize Latin words and how they affected. Yeah, they were really. Yeah, I took an honors program. So honors program were really tough. They really drilled into memorizing Latin words, which is very useful. So I'm really glad I did take an HP course. So what was really interesting is like now I can't stop saying things as if I see something as in or un in front of a word, it automatically means no because I already know it means not. You know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then understanding like if you say word like shun, Tion, occupation, for example, it's something directing to a noun. Like I can tell a little bit of the word class based on the word that's being attached, you know? And that's what makes it so interesting in English is that we did take a lot of our words from Latin. Latin is more straightforward. I think one of the cursed things about English is that we have too many exception rules. So it's easier to see morphology being more consistent in other languages than English, to be honest. But what's nice with English is that since we took words from Latin, we do have a consistency. Some words are consistent to their original purpose from Latin roots, and it's being used in English.
I see.
So yeah, that's basically what morphology is.
So then how do slang words fall into the, does it fall into like morphology in any way, or even in the previous slides that you talked about with phonology, like where does slang words for English fall into this?
So for slang, it would be much later. That would be falling under the category of semantics and pragmatics.
So I'm getting ahead of myself, is what you're saying.
Yes, a little ahead of yourself, but that's okay. That's okay.
Here we are, syntax.
Yes. So now we're arriving to a building block, right? So notice how we're building words. When you go to preschool, you learn about the vowel sounds, the alphabet. Once you start getting better at it, we start introducing words, which is like more morphology, hearing ing, running, staying, stayed, slept, sleep. Those like what's it called? Those, dang it, I forget what they're called. Irregular. There we go. Irregular verbs and stuff. Those are morphology. Now we enter syntax, which is how do we put words together? What are their rules and stuff? Syntax is understanding. Basically, they're the building block. I like to explain them as puzzle pieces or maybe even Legos. When you put things together, that is syntax. It's understanding that there is a rule, that the subject goes first, then the verb, then the object. Specifically in English, every language has their own rule. Like for example, Japanese has OVS as the other one. They have the object first, then the verb, and then whatever sometimes the subject is omitted. So a lot of the time it's OV sometimes. There are rare cases where you introduce yourself kind of like, or where they use SVO kind of. So it's like watashi wa namae wa, my name is Hana. Watashi wa namae wa Hana desu. Like when I introduce myself in Japanese. So that's kind of like a small SVO example. But they would normally say namae wa Hana. I don't even say watashi wa. I just say there's like this context in terms of Japan where they drop the I. So whenever there's no pronoun addressed, the assumption is that you are the speaker. You don't really need to mention that you're talking about yourself. The given idea is that you're talking about yourself. Not until you introduce a different subject. So you would say like my daughter, for example. Musume wa, for example, means my daughter. So now we change the pronoun or the subject to my daughter. So it's just really interesting to see how if you go to a different language, you see how these are like the differences between your language versus another language. So syntax is all about that. What's interesting though is if syntax is actually my specialty. I don't know if I already mentioned that in the beginning. What I love about syntax is that if you give me a parsing exercise, parsing basically means you give me a lot of examples of similar words overlapping each other. You would say like, okay, the dog was kicked, or the dog chased the boy kicked, and stuff like that. That's a parsing and glossing exercise where if you put them all together, I can tell you exactly what is the word order. I can tell you which is the past tense verb, blah, blah, blah. That's my favorite exercise in syntax. It's just breaking down and understanding basically a mix of morphology in there. Morphology, like I mentioned, is how words are formed together. I can identify them through that kind of exercise. So in essence, morphology and syntax go hand in hand. So we have the name morphosyntax used commonly to combine the two because they're just hand in hand. So moving on to the next point, we have semantics, words of meaning. So semantics and pragmatics, as far as I know inside in my field of pursuing linguistics, semantics and pragmatics are not necessarily they're not necessarily important for me to pursue when I was pursuing my degree, but if you wanted to, it's more of the understanding of how the culture affects language. Semantics is a meaning of words, so basically with semantics, it's the literal meaning of word. Like for example, saying nice job. What do you mean by nice job? Nice job as in you're complimenting the job itself that it's nice? Or are you saying that nice job meaning like the quality of the job? Or are you saying nice job as a compliment? We don't really know. Semantics is just taking the word nice job as its literal form. You just leave it as is. There's a lot of analyses on semantics. Like for example, one of the popular ones I like to talk about is the word naive, because in semantics, we use the word naive so much in like chastising someone to make someone feel bad of themselves because they're not aware of the language. That naive itself, the actual definition of naive means you weren't born with the knowledge. So you're basically a clean slate. Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's human, it's normal. But because we use the word naive in a negative sentence, it now has pejorized. It's a very fancy way of saying a word has taken on a very negative connotation. So whenever you hear someone tell you, no, you're too naive, you don't know what you're talking about. Naive has taken a much more negative connotation. That's why people think naive equals stupid when they're not. Naive means you were humanely, scientifically not born with the knowledge. Nothing's wrong with you. But because we use naive in the context of saying you're too young, you don't know what you're doing, you're naive, naive has now turned into stupid. that's why a lot of people misunderstand when people say you're naive, they take offense and they feel defensive because they hear that word in a negative connotation or in a context.
I see.
So that's semantics. And we can always go off on semantics because semantics is a very debatable class, from my understanding, because Norman took the class and I'm kind of like living through him vicariously. Semantics is a highly debatable class where whatever you say happen to the word is acceptable as long as you have enough support. So it's semantics is a debate class basically on how words change over time. Now moving on to the next one, which you've highlighted, is pragmatics. Pragmatics is like linguistic context. So this one is really good because pragmatics is more of the cultural aspect. It's the context in the situation that gives you the exact meaning of it. So for example, let's say Kuya Justin walks in and he drops his pencil and I say, nice job. Now we have a linguistic context because I didn't say it as nice job as in good job for dropping your pen, wonderful work, I'm praising you. No, I'm saying it as a sarcastic, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's what pragmatics is. It's the context, it's the culture, it's everything else that gives meaning to it. So the word nice job changes based on pragmatics. That's how it's affected.
I see. Interesting. I wouldn't have known it was like a linguistic context. I would have just described that kind of a situation as, oh, that's just the context of when that is being said. I didn't know it actually it sounds like it originated from pragmatics.
Yes, and that makes sense because if you put yourself in the shoes of students, for example, non-learner English learners, it's very humbling to really understand like how we take our first language for granted, especially English. When we welcome a new language learner into English and they don't know a lot about it, and you call them like they're like, I'm just gonna say it. Sorry for the profanity. You're the best bitch in town, for example, right? So a person would take it from a semantic point. Why are they calling me a bitch? Why are they calling me that? That's so inappropriate. What did I do wrong? You know, they would take it that way. That's semantics, is that they recognize the word, but they don't understand the context. Yeah. But see, entering into an English context where we use profanity like bitch as a compliment, saying, wow, you're the baddest bitch in town. It's a compliment. That's a pragmatic linguistic context that they only understand once they stay in the culture long enough to understand, oh, this word is not just a bad word, it's actually a really good praise too. Mm-hmm. That is the difference for it. So there's a category of just like rising with it. And a lot of the times when you watch movies, especially if they're like, Korean drama or English films, there's a lot of pragmatic situation that comes from the movie. That's how we're able to pick up on pragmatics, sort of, and translate it in our own L1 or first language to make an understanding of it. It was like, oh, okay, so we have a version of this in our language. Oh. So that's translation in that process. Yes.
I see. Interesting. Wow, I'm learning so many like new things about linguistics. So yeah, I can see where it like crosses over into like psychology, because that is like my general field of study, my general discipline. So it's like interesting to know all this.
Yes. So those are the common 5. That's the main core, right? So after you master and you understand all of these fields, we get into another context. Oh, they didn't even put this in the chart. They should. It's the next slide. It's called sociolinguistics. So pragmatics is the context, right? So whatever the context is, we read the room, whatever, that's pragmatics. Sociolinguistics is the language in society. So this is how the society where we're living in influences how language is being spoken. So for example, in the Japanese culture, they use more polite languages because that's a reflection of their culture. That's sociolinguistics. In America, why do we have such direct comments? Why do we cut corners? Instead of saying, all right, have a good day, wish you well, blah, blah, blah. We just say, all right, goodbye. Like, all right, bye, see ya. We say things very shorthand and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's a reflection of our culture. We like to cut corners. We like to keep things short. Even our text messages shows a lot of shortcut, especially like using like BRB, like be right back. Mm-hmm. We like to keep things short and sweet. The less we use, the better. It's just a reflection of the American culture. Maybe even English as a whole. I don't know if I should say that, because I don't know how Australian English does it. I don't know how British does it. But there seems to be a trend amongst, at least in a informal stance, especially through texting and communication, we do a lot of shortcuts. It's also carrying over to Japanese. where I've been learning new expressions that they use as shortcuts in Japanese text lingo too. It's interesting. So sociolinguistics influences how language is shaped. The way we speak is a reflection of culture.
Now, I find that other people say that English varies state by state in the United States. Would this be something that social linguistics would encompass?
Yes, correct. So depending on your society, that a lot of the times that influences your language. I might even say like maybe in terms of social linguistics, it affects accents. Different types of English accents across America. Social linguistics does a play in that too.
Yeah, I see. Interesting.
All right. So those are the main 6. I forgot about social linguistics. My bad, socio. But we do enter into the next question on the next slide.
So what makes linguistics an interesting discipline? So it sounds like you're going to be talking about kind of why you're here too again.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like what you mentioned too. It's I'm hoping whatever I explain thus far in the 6 core languages or what makes linguistics. The 6 core fields hopefully are interesting in their own way because, again, these are very, very deep. So even branching into these 6 core understandings of linguistics, you can actually pursue one of them at a time. Like, for example, Norman really loves phonology, so he pursued phonology. I love syntax, so I'm pursuing more syntax. Him picking up semantics as a class because it's not really a requirement, but we just need a linguistic course. He had a hard time with it, but I thrived in it, like having a whole conversation. It's like we can actually go off anywhere with linguistics. It's such an interesting discipline because there's just so many things to talk about, realizations. It's also, again, the whole topics of meta awareness always intrigues me. I love learning about, okay, this is the way I function is because of this reason. It's so interesting, So linguistics, again, has so many disciplines. There's even, I think in the next few slides, I think the next slide even covers it. Hold on. Yeah, it does. The next slide, I'm going to show you or discuss a little bit of each niches. So the next 3 slides are going to talk about different niches of linguistics. So other than the 6, if you feel like the 6 are maybe I don't really like any of those, there's so much more we can do with linguistics because in essence, you should have a good competency. I can't even talk. Competency. You should have enough competency in the first 6, right? Because it's actually required. You need to have social linguistics as one of your fields to understand how language is affecting the environment and the language that you're learning. Because there are so many things you can do with linguistics. Other than knowing those top 6, you can even pursue a specific language: English, Tagalog, Spanish, French. There are people who branch away from linguistics and go pursue specifically a specific language because that's another deep dive of itself. There's so many things to look into it. Just like how English, for example, pursuing English as an English linguist, I'm not just looking at the history of how English is forming, how the words came to be, or like Old English, Middle English, and modern day English, that progression. There's also talking about influence from different cultures through historical events like, for example, I think it's Normandy, when Normandy infiltrated or influenced the English. That's why we have a lot of French in English, is because of the Normandy invasion.
Oh,
So
interesting. I didn't know that.
a lot of history, depending on especially colonialism, conquering, colonizing. Colonizing has a huge effect on language, especially in the Philippines too. That's why we have so many languages in the Philippines, because there seems to be a divide in terms of what language is dominant, or there's a compromise, like people are compromising of this part of the language and that part of the language. They create a pidgin of a mixture of the 2 languages. It's like, for example, like what Norman and I were saying on TFP before, we talked about Davao language. Davao City is a mixture of Cebuano and Tagalog, because Davao is inhabited by a lot of Cebuanos, but it's also, because it's a city, it's also inhabited by upper class people like Tagalog speakers or Tagalog educators. So they have a mixture of English, Tagalog, and Cebuano all mixed in Davao City. So Davao Tagalog is different from Manila Tagalog. That's what I'm essentially trying to say.
Ah.
So we have a lot of like the Philippines as its whole is the Philippines as its whole is its own can of worms because there's so many things we could talk about TFP or the Philippine languages under TFP because that's why we branched out and said TFP will be more dedicated for Philippine languages because it's so interesting to talk about many languages in the Philippines. But in any case, coming back here, as you can see, that's why linguistic feels like it's vast because there's a lot of languages that even have not been recorded too. There's a lot of like dead languages now. It's not just like dead African languages. There's also dead Filipino languages that are just no one uses anymore, and we have no idea if they are dead or if they even existed because a lot of the times languages are spoken, so they're not recorded. So how can we know if a language died,
So what makes a language die then? Do you know?
Yes. So the reason why a language dies is because of, for example, popularity is one. So, for example, let's make up a pretend language in the Philippines. There's only a language that's specifically spoken, like, again, tying into sociolinguistics. A small community only speaks this language. But because people are starting to see the trend in popularity with technology and mainstream media, they want to learn Tagalog more. So they branch away from their language from that community until the older generations are the only ones left behind. The younger generation is moving towards mainstream language. So until the last person dies of that community, the language dies itself. Because who knows if these mainstreamers, the ones who are moving towards mainstream, do they still have a good grasp of that language from that community,
I see.
So ultimately, what kills a language is the last person who's knowledgeable of it. That's the death of a language.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And this is talked about a lot in African languages because there's a lot that have already died. There's even been some news that covered a recent death of an African language because once a person who's knowledgeable of the language is deceased, we don't know the questions that we're looking for as linguists, like how did the word come? What is the environment we use that word? Or how does it sound like here? Do they use emphasis? There's a lot of factors to look into linguistics and or languages as a whole, that it's just a lot, like
yeah, I see.
that we don't really put a lot of thought into it. And also in a sense, I kind of feel like we take language for granted, that we don't realize that there's actually so much thought put into languages and communicating.
I see. So let's speak about typology then. How is this a niche in linguistics?
Okay, so we'll come back to historical linguistics in a second. So typology compares multiple languages on the basis of shared features. So typology is interesting because they aim to find the properties of language that are common and uncommon across the world. So typology is like they're kind of the ones responsible for understanding cognates. I don't know if you remember that word or if you're familiar with it.
I'm not. What are cognates?
So cognates are basically words that look the same and sound the same and actually have the same definition. So, for example, I like to use Spanish and French here because they come from the similar background. They have the word escuchar in Spanish. Escuchar means to listen. But if you listen to French, écouter, they seem kind of familiar with each other. They seem, in terms of spelling or even the sound of it, sounds a little close to each other. That's cognates. Cognates is basically you have a language that sounds similar to another one and it's actually the same meaning in another language.
I see.
That's the responsibility of typologists. So they're just comparing multiple languages, and it overlaps with historical linguistics because they do use a little bit of typology as well. A lot of the linguistic fields are always going to double, triple, quadruple, poly dip into each other because they're all going to be touching bases with one another. But typologists, their main aim is to find the properties of language across common and uncommon across the world. So another thing that typology, based on a video I watched, I think it was the Lingo Otter who showed me this. Typologists were the ones responsible for finding SVO, the word order, which is overlapping with syntax, understanding subject, verb, object. Which language in the world uses subject, verb, object as their structure? What other language uses VSO, verb, subject, object, or OVS, object, verb, subject, etc.? So all those different combinations, it's a typologist's job to understand that.
I see. Interesting. And then with psycholinguistics, then like how do those relate to? Does this relate to typology and historical linguistics in any way?
Oh yeah, definitely. So with psycholinguistics, I think actually wait, psycholinguistic is more in terms of the intersect between psychology and linguistics. So this is where psychology comes in. Psycholinguistics or linguistic. I can't even talk. Sorry.
It's okay.
Psycholinguists. That's what I'm looking for. Psycholinguists. Their job is to attempt to figure out how the brain processes languages. So they're the meta. They're the ones who talk about psycholinguistic overlaps with pedagogy. So if you are someone doing pedagogy or education in linguistics, like how to teach learning a language, which we'll talk about in the next slide, we overlap with psycholinguists a lot because what we're talking about is understanding how does one understand the language. Like, for example, when I'm thinking about how can I teach or understand or be able to record how someone is able to read something, because reading is the most difficult for an educator to understand if someone is understanding a context, right? Because reading is a mental thing, not unless it's read aloud. So tell me then, how can I know that this person knows or understands 100% of what they're reading? That's what I'm trying to pitch in there.
I see.
So we do like overlap with one another. So yeah, psycholinguists are basically the figuring out how to brain process how does the brain process the language. So it's similar to neurolinguistics because neurolinguistics is not the same as psycholinguistics. So again, the small nuances and differentiating them is similar to phonetics versus phonology. They're different. Neurolinguistics, they focus on intersection of the brain and linguistics. It focuses on the actual physical process that the brain goes through the utilization of language. So neurolinguistics, they actually look at the CT scans. They look at the brain. They see which one is active when they're talking in a different language, or they're more of focus on the brain itself. That's neuro. Psycho is how are they able to how they are able to figure out how the brain processes it. So you can see there's small nuances on the words on there. So neurolinguists also study the region of the brain that's activated when doing different language tests. Interestingly, if you're doing not child language development, but language development as a whole, neurolinguists will overlap with them because neurolinguists, this is a study of children and how their brains are able to acquire the language. So neurolinguists we would be referring to their test. They will be scanning the child's brain to see which part of their brain lights up when a language is being used, or how they're able to detect if a language is, like, let's say we use the incorrect grammar, something goes off in our brain. Like our brain will automatically show it when it's being scanned from a neurolinguist. So it's very interesting. So yeah, I think we skipped over historical linguists. So this one I don't feel the most confident in because I did not do well in this class, but it's very, very interesting. Norman really loves historical linguistics. So historical linguistics is a study of the study of languages that change over time. So again, it does overlap a little bit with typology. It does overlap with sociolinguistics, because we're seeing change taking place. And basically in historical linguistics, they're trying to figure out how languages are related to one another, again, similar to typology, and the reconstruction of old languages. So I like to always think about historical linguistics as like the historian, the history person. So, but it doesn't mean it is the history person all the time, because again, there's another branch under historical linguistics that you can be someone who looks at the change over time over a specific language. So that's hundreds of the different fields. You can do hundreds of fields in terms of English, Chinese, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, Tagalog. Like there's a lot of, like you can go into a lot of branches of languages there. Another field of historical linguistics is understanding how they are related to one another. So again, similar to typology. And then reconstruction of old language. This one was the hardest one for me because I tried reconstructing an old language. Very difficult. there's a lot of theories that have already been accepted in historical linguistics because it's just a debate of what is accepted, and they're trying to show and prove that the rule is being applied to this language and this language and this language. Reconstruction of old languages is very difficult because, again, we actually have no document that shows how a language was used before, especially the oldest kinds. Like, if we go into historical linguistics, there's a lot of branches of different types of, like, the father language or the mother language, the original ones. Those ones don't exist anymore. Like, for example, I think English is under the Germanic branch. So the original Germanic language, we don't know what it is anymore because it branched out into many of these different branches of small languages. And even then, we can even break down English going into more niche like fields. Like, for example, slang is another field of its own, right? So every language is very complex. That's what makes linguistics so interesting. And there's so many things we could explore with it, but again, not enough manpower.
Yeah, I see. Interesting.
So on the next slide, we are going to talk about my favorite. This is all about the language development. So this entire corner is more dedicated to language acquisition. We have language development, which is a lot of the times when we say language development, it's relating to babies and children. There's also been courses where they title the class Children Language Development to emphasize more that it's focused on kids. So again, linguistics is always highlighting the specifics of what we're learning or talking about. So language development is basically how babies and children develop languages. It's actually the introduction of what we call the WUG test. I don't know if you've heard of that famous
the WUG
science.
test? Mm-mm.
The WUG test. So just to summarize what the WUG test is, basically the study goes, the scientists show an animal, I believe based on the video I watched. I think it was the otter lingo again, or lingo otter was the name. And they were saying how babies were presented with an image of a bird, right? So they gave you a bird, an actual bird. So they put another picture of a bird next to it. So they said, okay, what do you call this? And the baby said birds with an S at the end. So they repeated the gesture again, and they reinvented this little animal that looks like a wug. It looks like a bird, but it's called a wug. So they said, this is called a wug, is what the scientists said. Now I'm going to give you another wug. So they put two of them in front of the kid. They said, what did they call this? And they said wugs with an S. And it was a scientific breakthrough in linguistics because it goes to show that children don't copy based on what adults did, but they had the innate ability to learn how language was formed, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's why that test is so big in the scientific community in terms of linguistics. The WUG test proved that children are capable of having pattern recognition.
That's interesting. Wow. I didn't know that, something like that. Because that's very interesting, because I didn't think, you don't think of children like being able to like do something like that. And then this is kind of something that's, I can see why it's like breaking through.
Yeah, it's like a breakthrough because we thought that children, they are just like parroting off their parents. But if we're removing the parents in the room and we are showing them, this is called a WUG, an imaginary word, we're just trying to see, is it able to add the S at the end, which is pluralizing it. We're trying to see, does it know the rule of plurals? So that in itself shows that the child is intelligible. Like the child is actually much more intelligent than we gave them credit for, because we believe that children are not intelligent, right? Like whoever's established that, to this day we somehow hold on to that idea that children are not intelligible, but actually they are. We just don't give them credit for it, you know?
Yeah.
So linguistic, so that's why language development is all about focusing on language development for children and babies. And it's really interesting because then again, everything is based on hypotheses and theories, mainly because the child cannot speak for itself. It cannot tell you how its brain is activating. It's not telling you anything that we would understand as intelligible, but we are able to understand based on tests that we give them, you know?
Yeah.
So, but the adults do the talking, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So that is language development. The interesting thing about language development too, and I feel like I want to share this because it's so close to heart, and I got a lot of attention on this on Twitter, which made me so happy and proud. Language development, you can actually ID a child when it comes to whatever pronunciation they can create. So for example, in language development, we have a standard or a guide where they tell you language acquisition milestones for children. So for example, children have the stage of, how they talk. Maybe for the common adult who's not in linguistic would just say, okay, maybe that's just normal. They're babbling, they're saying whatever, this or that. But for a linguist or speech pathologist, these are breakthroughs for children, and we can quickly ID the age of a child. So for example, in the first few months, it's expected that the child would only say vowels. They won't say ooh, that's all they can say. When they reach 1 or 2 years old, they're able to pronounce the bilabials. Bilabials being the b as in bug, d as in dad, m as in mum. That's why it's easy for them to say mom or dad as their first word, because they're bilabials. Sorry, not D's. D's are not there yet. Mum would be more common. Whereas if they're referring to their dad, they might say baba or papa, because B and P's are bilabials. They're created on the mouth, lips. That is the first one. So that's why it's easy for children to say their first words either papa or mama. It's their first one. So that's at 1 or 2 years old. Right around 2 or 3, they start to say fricatives. Fricatives are the F, the V, the anything that's making that friction in your mouth. That's when they would say father, fa, like that sound. Mm-hmm. That's when they start to say that around that age. When you enter 3 or 4, it gets more complex. And over time, it gets more and more complex as they grow old until I think around 7 years old or up to 10. That's when they have mastery of whatever sounds that is available in that language. But of course, the more complex it is, the more difficult it is to attain. So that brings on the theory of ease, I think, or the theory of ease attainment. I don't remember what it's called in language acquisition, but there was a theory that the ability to produce the sounds the easiest is the one that's going to be produced first. Mm-hmm. So, and then based on a study of children acquiring languages, that's how they created a standard or a guide of milestones for children of how they learn or acquire language. So that being said, tying back to what I mentioned about Twitter, there was this big Spy Family chapter that just dropped, and basically Anya says bubberfy, right? So based on their word choices, b and f, I was able to identify her age was 2 to 3 years old very quickly.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah. And that post blew up. I was so proud of it. I was like, yes, this is great. This is what I'm saying. Why I'm so obsessed with Spy Family is because of, they have a lot of linguistics. Like really, they really put a lot of thought into it. It made me really happy. But yeah, it's just really interesting. Like if just the word alone, language alone can really say so much about a person, really. Mm. So moving on from language development, we go into SLA, which stands for second language acquisition. There's been a huge discussion of this when I was a postgraduate. We don't like the word second language because everyone, with second language acquisition, the difference between language development and second language acquisition is more pertaining to the adult. Language acquisition is for adults. So if you say SLA, automatically everyone in linguistics knows you're talking about adults who are learning a language. But again, we're getting very nitty-gritty with the specifics of words because using the word second kind of feels like an insult in a sense.
I see.
Because, yeah, that's why we're saying, like, I don't think second language acquisition would be appropriate in language acquisition. There's even been a rename of the system as just language acquisition, LA, that's it. Because to say second language acquisition, we are assuming that they only know one language. Like they only know, like for example, if you're from England or if you're from Britain, right? Yeah. In that area, there's a tendency for people to be more multilingual over there because in terms of Britain, every country that they're around, they have someone who speaks Spanish. Mm-hmm. There's someone who speaks French. There's someone who speaks Italian. There's a higher chance of them having more than one language. Whereas in America, because of the way our history was made, we forced people to only learn English. So therefore, we dub it second language, that if you're from America, you're going to learn English as your second language because wherever you're from is whatever language you know. So it kind of feels a little, it feels kind of negative. That's why there's that whole discussion on second language as a title. It should just be language acquisition.
I see. Interesting.
So in the case of language acquisition, it's similar to language development, but focuses on adults who are learning a language. Again, I'm going to cross off second language in my notes. It's an attempt to figure out how our native language influences our second language and how being a bilingual differs from being a monolingual. And it figures out how best methods for teaching a second language or teaching a language acquisition in general. So this is my field. This is what I'm really, really interested in because I really love the science of how to teach someone how to acquire the language, especially when I am my own guinea pig a lot of the times. So it's been very, very, very fun for me to explore. So language acquisition as a whole is like, just like you mentioned, your questions with polyglot versus bilingual, what's the difference between them with 1.5 generation? Why is that all relevant? It's because of language acquisition. We really talk about the different identities that comes with the titles that we call ourselves. So a lot of the times we become more careful with how we introduce ourselves in linguistics, especially with the languages that we know. So other than that, LA, basically with language acquisition, in terms of what I do with podcast and in terms of my teaching style, I'm very interested of like, how can I best teach someone? Like that's basically end game for me for the Homebody Cafe in Salkut, right? That we discussed.
Mm-hmm.
It's teaching how can I teach you how to learn English in a better way? Because studying language acquisition, there has been like over hundreds of methods that we could teach a language. And there's even more of that multiplied times 4 because there are 4 attributes for language acquisition, which is speaking, writing, listening, and reading. So there's even 100 more techniques in amongst these 4 attributes. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's like, it's just a lot in terms of language acquisition. Finally, speech language pathology, SLP. Technically, if you pursue linguistics, you are not going to get speech language pathology as an option. But I wanted to add this here, just like Lingo Otter did as well, because there is a lot of intersection between speech pathology and linguistics. So if you were to pursue speech language pathology, you have to go through medicine first. So you have to pursue the med field and then pursue speech pathology. But speech pathology overlaps with linguistics, but it's not under the same umbrella, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah. So SLP uses knowledge in phonetics and phonology to help individuals who suffer from speech language and voice disorder. So this could include children with delayed in language development. So again, it comes into their knowledge of language development. So they did have to learn a language development course to recognize delayed language for children language development. And they also assist patients who have lost their ability to speak due to stroke and other accidents, and aiding elderly with their ability to swallow. They also assist individuals who have stutters, lisps, or other similar issues. So again, this is more of a field of in the medical field if you wanted to pursue speech language pathology. As far as I know, SLP is kind of like a plan C for me. So if I don't get far, if I feel tired of linguistics, or in any case, I would have to pursue going back into school and start over again, essentially.
I see.
Just to go to speech language pathology, because it's not the same. Because there was more of a nuance and stress on, again, the science of the human body, more so before you go into speech language pathology. They want you to really understand the human body before you go into the specific field.
Yeah.
I think that's the consensus I got from it.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I know I actually have a few friends who are certified SLPs. They practice like daily about it. Like this is their career. So actually, that was one of my questions as I was thinking about when you were talking, like about the niches of linguistics. If SLP kind of falls under that, and from what I hear, not so much.
Yes, it does in terms of what they're learning, because they have to learn language development, but predominantly the majority voice is medical field.
I see.
Yeah, so that's what they're trying to stress.
Okay.
And then the last niche. So we have, again, I see I wrote sociolinguistics again. Oh my goodness. But yeah, sociolinguistics is its own category, but then again, I added it under the core because what is language without its culture or its influence too? So sociolinguistics, again, is an intersection between sociology and linguistics. It focuses on the effect that society and culture have on language and vice versa. So it's not just the culture affecting the language. The way that the language is being trended as well can influence culture as well, which is very interesting. So you can say, like, for example, social media and the voice that we use on social media, like TikTok, Instagram, that's a reflection of its own social linguistics, because we were kind of studying of how words are put. Like, for example, the voice on YouTube or the video we put on YouTube is not going to be the same as the video we would put on Instagram or TikTok, because it's a different kind of environment. That's kind of the idea of what social linguistics is
I see.
basically.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your voice basically is just different based on like the platform that you're posting on.
Yes.
And that's so.
Yeah.
I see. I see. Okay.
Yeah, so social linguistics is a lot like that. So if I were to compare it in terms of marketing or in terms of like platform voice, social linguistics would be a good comparison to it. Next one is computational linguistics. So computational linguistics is very popular, especially in our era, especially if you are into AI. Computational linguistics is responsible for making the computer basically understand human speech. Like, they're the ones coding how to make the computer understand and speak the human language. So if you, a lot of the times, if you're like interested in pursuing like computational or computer science, computational linguistics, there's a very high demand for them right now, and especially for AI too. So I don't know if I have mixed feelings about this, because like, yes, I'm happy that we have computational linguistics and that we're able to make our life easier by asking like Gemini or Siri or Amazon or Alexa or something. I'm happy that we have them, but at the same time, it's just like the concern is, again, there's a good thing to it because there's a life of ease, but at the same time, abuse it and become lazy, you know? I'm kind of torn between the two.
I see.
But I'm interested in computational linguistics, but I'm pretty sure it's different, because if you pursue computational linguistics, I think it's mandatory to pick up comp sci topics, like maybe understanding the language of coding, I assume. I'm not really sure.
I see.
So it would be nice to meet someone who does comp linguistics. It would be very interesting to have a conversation then.
Yeah.
And
Anyone in the audience who is learning this or knows someone, please reach out.
Yes, please. We would love to have a conversation with them and see what their field is like. Because again, even though I'm sharing a little bit of each niche linguistics or fields, I don't exactly have a good grasp of them because I'm not in there, you know? Like, even linguists who pursue translations, there's a different field of translation. There's a manga translation, there's movie media translation, there's live translation, there are different platforms, and every experience is slightly unique than the other, you know? So some of them are all different. They're all different experiences. Interestingly, even though I watched the Otter, I think it's the Otter Lingo or Lingo Otter, I keep forgetting his name, sorry. I was watching another video, I think it was called Matters something. I don't remember, but I saved it in my video files, and I'm so sorry I forgot the name. But it was something about forensics linguistics, which was very interesting because my sister pursued forensics in her undergrad. I pursued English ed and then went off into linguistics in my master's. So it's very interesting to see there's an intersection between my sister's and my field, you know? I found out what it was. Basically, if you pursue forensic linguistics, it's analyzing linguistic clues to dig for hidden meanings. So that being said, it's someone who's very like high key, like very detail oriented to words, because again, you have to have a very good understanding of the core languages or the core factors of what makes linguistics in order to pursue these other niche fields. So for a forensic linguist, they are looking at word choice, they are looking at grammar, and they are looking at punctuation. And something I wanted to highlight again, which really stood out to me, and I thought this was very interesting because, again, I mentioned before that I loved words and I love expressing myself with words, that I found there's a word for it. It's called idiolect. Idiolect means it's basically the fingerprint of the way that you speak, right? So forensics analyze idiolects. So if there's anything from a bad guy, so let's say a murderer left a long book of their plans of something, or they left a paper out, maybe 2 or 3 pages, they can quickly ID who you are based on the voice that you create. And it's very interesting because for every generation who writes on paper, everyone is different, right? So you can identify the era or the age of a person very quickly by using specific words. Like, for example, there was this study on a murderer. I can't remember what the study was, and someone covered this, and I'm really sorry, I forgot the name of who the murderer was or the case. But basically, there was someone, and I'm going to summarize it. The case was there was a person who creates bombs, and he sends it to people, and basically those bombs like blow up, right? And they hurt people. And this person decided to write a 53-page letter about what they think is going to happen next. Basically, they're trying to create their own future, and they follow it to a T, like what they wrote about. Because that person submitted a 53-page paper, they essentially revealed who they were. And it was so interesting because they use a specific language. So, for example, the person said broad, right? A broad and a lady or something. And these word choices were never spoken by a female. So who can say it? So they identified the sex was a male. And then they used a certain word that wasn't used in modern time speech. So they were like able to identify this language, this jargon was used in this area. So they knew this person was from Chicago and in a very specific area of Chicago. So they were quick to analyze where this person came from and their voice. So they were able to identify who the person was. And of course that person was actually turned in. They caught the guy.
That's
so
crazy.
right, and it's just all because of forensic linguistics. Like, you can say so much about yourself. Like, if I were to write myself on paper, and of course this is actually quite true because since I'm a teacher and I read all of my students' paper, back in the day when I used to work at a school where I had my students write essays for me, I had to read them. So I could tell without looking at the name who was speaking on the paper. I was like, okay, I know who's speaking. Then I would check the name and be like, oh yeah, I'm right. I know who it is. So everyone has an idiolect. So how we present ourselves in speech or how we present ourselves on paper, we can easily find who we are because fortunately, the way we are in terms of society, we have a corpus. A corpus basically means we have a machine that has a recording of how we write through Facebook, through social media. It's kind of scary when we point it out this way that social media in its way has collected all of our data. The way we presented ourselves online, they have our idiolect. They have our fingerprint, you know? So modern day...
Now, could your idiolect be like, could it sound older or could it sound younger? I mean, does age factor in?
Yes, based on the vocabulary you use.
Ah, I see. So someone could sound older but not necessarily be older.
Yes. So if a person was really trying to hide who they are, they would be very careful not only in the crime scene that they created, but they would also be careful of leaving out clues. Like, first and foremost, their idiolect should not be showing. You know, like the way that their mannerism and stuff. Of course, there's also interview with people who are close to the person. They can quickly ID if that is the right person or not. So you would have to be consistent on creating a person that's not you, if that was the case.
Wow, I see.
So it's a lot of thought, right? So it's a lot of thought process. I'm not saying this to give ideas to make a murder. Please don't. Don't. No, don't. Please don't. This is a disclaimer. We're not trying to create murderers here.
No, but it makes sense though, because then, like, I mean, because I've heard some people say that like they sound older than they've actually, or they like the way that they write sounds older than they are when they actually meet the person. So I was just curious if that's something that forensic linguistics would touch upon.
That's correct, yes. Like, for example, The Great Gatsby, I can tell you it's old. Because the language that they use is not the same as we use modern day. Like, sure, we have a lot of the words that are still, like, used into play. Like, in syntax, we have something called, like, I think there were, like, open words and closed words is what we categorized it. Closed words are basically, like, the, to, what are they actually called in grammar? The, a, and, those are called articles. To is a preposition. So closed words are words that are like, they never change. The ones that are open words are considered nouns and vowels, and sometimes adjectives. Like, for example, Snapchat it, Google it, right? It came from a word of Google, but as a noun, now it became a verb, Google it, right? So those are considered or classified open words, so they keep changing classes. A lot of the times, to identify the ID usually comes from a noun and a verb. Like, those are typically the ones that ID an age, because if you actually look up certain words on Google, it tells you when that word became popular, and it shows you a trend or a graph of if that word is being used today. So
Oh,
it
yeah. I see.
IDs it. Yeah. So it
Yeah.
tells you where that word came from. So it's really incredible to see how, how idiolect and forensics linguists are able to identify people based on speech.
I see. Huh.
And it's very interesting. Okay. So moving on to the next one, we have what can you do with a linguistics degree? I think the most popular one people will always be concerned of is translation, being a translator.
Mm-hmm.
That's the number one. It makes sense because when you have multiple language as your access, you think that you're going to be a translator for someone. But translation is actually very difficult. I took a social justice course and we touched upon translations, and it really opened my mind to really see that translation is actually more complex than you think. Um, Translations, I have mad respect for people in it because the translator's job is to do their utmost best to represent someone, right? A translator can be in different platforms. Like I mentioned earlier, a translator can be translating books. It can be translating mangas from Japanese to English. It can be someone translating in real life from having someone speak in their mother tongue language and then having it said in English by the translator to the best of their abilities. It's really hard. As far as I know, I've heard that translators, especially ones who are in real time, it's the hardest because you have to be very attentive. I have no idea how they are able to get the word exactly the same because, again, the hardest part about being a translator is trying to use words that best expresses what they want, and expressing yourself in language is hard, because
Yeah.
there's so many
Yeah.
ways you can say something, but use a wrong word and it just gives you a different angle, right?
Yeah, and that makes me think about, I don't know if you've seen videos of it, but there's been a lot of musicians who have like I'm assuming ASL because they are like American artists. They have an ASL
Uh-huh.
translator for a specific part of their audience, and that translator like I don't know if I'm trying to think of like an artist that did it, but the first part artist that just comes to my head, I don't know if they've had an ASL translator at one of their concerts, but like Fetty Wap or something like that, or even like Cardi
Mm.
B. I think Cardi B had
Had one.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think, and it's just like, oh, so how are they able to translate all of that to their audience in the same way that Cardi B has her lyrics? So that's something that like what linguists could potentially work on, right?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, it's very interesting because I feel like Cardi B's concert when she had like the translator dancing while also translating for the deaf community,
Mm-hmm.
it's very interesting because it's like it's a dance of itself, it's a language of itself. How are deaf people able to hear it? I've had some friends actually pursue like translation is their emphasis, and they've told me they can actually feel it through bass. They can feel the vibrations of music.
I
Um,
see.
but in terms of knowing the pacing, it's how the translator is able to pace out the word in translation. So they capture the rhythm somehow in their translations. It's very interesting.
Yeah, because it looked like they were just vibing the whole time. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sure because I can't really speak to that, but yeah.
Yes, I agree. It's so interesting. And on top of that, it's like again, they're dancing too. Dancing has a beat, right?
Mm,
So dancing, there is a rhythm. There's also another beat there. So these are small nuances that probably a deaf person is able to capture.
mm, I see.
It's so interesting. So yeah, there's translation, especially for deaf communities. Translation for, like, for example, mangas and media. It's actually hard because there's a lot of things that go on and into consideration of creating translation through an audience, right? There's going to be a lot of marketing expressions here that I'm going to use. One of them is example is called cultural discount. Cultural discount basically means that a language is translated into the recipient. So, for example, let's talk about Squid Game for a quick second. Squid Game was translated to their marketing viewers. So there were some things in the Squid Game original, the Korean dub, the original dub, did not translate successfully over to the English audience because it's only something exclusively that the Korean people would understand, but the English people would miss out on. That's an example of cultural discount.
I see.
And it happens a lot too with manga. Since I mentioned before, I analyzed Spy Family with a group of friends for fun, and There is a lot of times where localization, another term that we use, localization meaning like, is there a version of this that's equivalent from the source language being translated over to the marketing, receiving, recipient language. So in the example I mentioned to you about butterfly, in terms of spy family, it's different in Japanese because in Japanese they use the word chocho, which means butterfly in Japanese, but Anya, when she says it, she says chocho-san. So it's interesting because the word san is usually meant as a respectful marker. And children are known to attach san to things like, oh, paper san or this and that, because like it's supposed to show that they have respect embedded into their learning. But as they grow older, they drop the san. They say chocho, like it's a butterfly. They're not going to call it chocho-san, which is why it's really interesting.
Yeah,
And
so
again, that's another marker in terms of Japanese culture, which is different in terms of linguistics, is that Chocho-san, it shows the age of Anya as well from a Japanese linguistic stance, because she uses the word san that only babies are like usually saying, toddlers are saying. And also the spelling for Chocho, they're pronounced as chou, but when she says it in the manga, it's cho. So there's a spelling affected there too.
I see.
So notice that I mentioned this is a Japanese example, but compared to English, where I say butterfly, the point is across. It's not the same thing. The description of it is not the same thing, but the intention is clear. It's the same.
I see.
That's localization that I'm trying to share. So it's influenced by its own culture, and it has its own thing. And sometimes localization is able to be picked up in English. So from Japanese to English, sometimes localization happens, and that's cool. But at the same time, there's a loss that happens. It's like, okay, with translation, sometimes it's not always what's the word for it? Like trying to be I'm trying to find it. Get the accurate representation of the culture in itself. Because again, we know the English readers are the marketing consumers in this case. That's why localization took place. It's just so the English consumers would understand it in their understanding of their culture. Versus if the Japanese person or the translator took the Japanese one and brought it over to English, like the exact same translation, chocho, they wouldn't understand it. Why? Because they're not Japanese. They don't understand language or linguistics too. Whereas for me, I was able to capture it because only from first English. I was able to capture English because I am an English consumer. But because I have access to Japanese friends, I'm able to make that connection between linguistics and Japanese too.
I see.
Yeah. So that's another like can of worms of translation. It's like there's a lot of fields you can see with translation. It's so hard. There's even translators in court hearings too. That's crazy. You know, there's a lot.
Yeah. So what else can you do with a linguistics degree?
So other than translations, there's education. So just like my field, for example, it can be teaching a language. It can be even teaching linguistics as a whole. You know, getting meta right now. Like you learn linguistics to teach linguistics.
I see.
So yeah, you can turn it into education. And again, education is, if we have so many fields, let's say 1,000 for now. If we have 1,000 fields that we can go with linguistics degree, we can have 1,000 fields to teach it. So we're showing different methods through a pedagogical and scientific approach as well. Other degrees with linguistics, media. I mentioned you can use linguistics of again, translation. I don't know what else I can say about media with linguistics. Like what you mentioned, signing ASL, like at Cardi B's concert. It can be used for media. Tech industries, what we mentioned, computational linguistics goes in under tech industries. So definitely anything related to tech, definitely blowing up at this time.
I see. Especially as language becomes more important and as apps like basically need it for certain things. And then, yeah, I can definitely see how AI is like kind of tying into a bunch of this too. So
yeah, absolutely. It's crazy. Like, people don't really think about it. Like I mentioned, people take language for granted. We don't really think about the small stuff because, again, we only care about the main message is passed across. but sometimes that main message can come off as misunderstanding at times. So that's why the need for no ambiguity, more clarity comes into play, especially in linguistics.
Yes, I see.
Okay, next slide.
Yeah, so any advice for someone entering the field of linguistics?
Be open-minded. I think there was a lot of videos that I looked into, people talking about linguistics and their experiences. I think for me, just go in excited, be open-minded, allow yourself to try everything, even if it's really hard. Like, I'm gonna be honest, syntax was the hardest for me. And it's funny because I turned out to be a syntactician because of that. Even though I had the hardest time in syntax, I became a master at it in the end, which is really funny to me. So yeah, entering the field of linguistics, be open-minded, try everything. Try and do something, be part of a linguistic program in your school. Go into translation if you like it. See if there's something there that grabs your attention. Explore a language other than English. Go into your first native language or anything. Oh, maybe even do computational English if you want. You can go anywhere with it, honestly, but just always be open-minded because you really never know where linguistics is going to take you. As for me, something that I really like about how fortunate we are in modern day is that with linguistics just starting to become a conversation and slowly becoming more and more relevant, especially with TikTokers talking about linguistics and a need for conversation for them. I feel like linguistics is creating its own branch in terms of social media and mainstream. So with my knowledge of linguistics, I feel like even making this podcast, I'm creating a new environment where linguists can pursue learning about linguistics and like maybe educating more from YouTube or any other platforms, you know?
Yeah, and then I think that goes with anything too, because each field is going to have their own like niches, and you don't really know what kind of niche that you want to pursue until you actually try it, or until you actually like read about it, or even like find people that are working in that field to get their perspective on things. And I've done that too, where I wanted to specifically find out what kind of niche I wanted to pursue in psychology. And what I did was I reached out to people on LinkedIn and asked them what their perspective on what they did in their day-to-day, and if that was something that I found myself wanting to do. And that's definitely for anyone entering not just the field of linguistics in general, but just like someone who's just curious about life and like, or even feeling like they're lost, like where do I go? It's like, well, you gotta try stuff to figure out where you're going, otherwise you're kind of just stuck where you're at.
Exactly. And I feel like that's just a common conversation with students who are afraid of going to school because they don't know and it's what they want to do. And on top of that, there's a fear for, just wasting money. I'm just someone who believes that, what you pay for is experience. When you go to college, whether it's right or wrong, or you wasted money or you feel regrettable about it, just remember you're paying for experience. That's something invaluable. And sure, we lose a lot of money for that, but money can always be made up. Experience cannot.
Agreed.
Okay, so then on the last slide, basically is my question back to everyone else who's listening to this podcast. This is my question for you. Which of these linguistic fields sounds interesting to you? So, Kuya, what did you think? What was one that stood out to you?
There's been a few. I mean, I liked the forensic psychology, but forensic linguistic aspects. I really like that you can find like the origins of what someone, like how they talk, just like based on how they write, like basically their own voice in that. So that was really interesting for me. Also, like since psychology is my background too, I did not know that there was a psycholinguistic field. So that's actually pretty interesting to me too.
Right. And it's another, like, I feel like in the world, if you go into psychology, it's just a very niche group, so you have to look for it because psycholinguistics is more emphasized in linguistics because there's more of a need of understanding, okay, how does the language impact how a person thinks and stuff, and of course neurolinguistics too. I've totally forgot we have different words for different things. like revisiting phonetics versus phonology are different, and then psycholinguistics and neurolinguistics are different too, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot we have very specific words for these. It's been a while. It's been a hot minute.
yeah But that was it for me.
I'm glad. So I hope this conversation or this podcast or episode as a whole interests you guys on what is linguistics, what's the field of it. Of course, again, there's hundreds of ways we can go with linguistics, and a lot of these fields, we just don't have enough people to pursue it. We don't have enough manpower. We don't have enough scientists or researchers in the field to really explore more. So that's why I'm saying linguistics is still kind of young. I think that's how I got this whole impression that, linguistics is still quite new because we're it's resurfacing new fields. And as we're pursuing different fields, it's actually introducing newer fields. It's like when you reach one study, it introduces a new study right after.
Yep.
It's so interesting. It's just never, it's like a perpetual continuation of just studying. Where are we going to go with this? We don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are my views on linguistics. So, and also Kuya Justin's as well. So we've reached the end of today's session and episode. If you guys have any questions regarding linguistics, or if you want to have a conversation in the chat below regarding linguistics or what field you're pursuing, I would be so happy to have a conversation with you guys about it and learn more about your fields, especially if you're choosing disciplines that are not language acquisition related, because LA is my field. And English as well. Or if you guys are pursuing English, maybe you're doing English in terms of historical linguistics. That would be an interesting conversation because I know a bit of the English history, just not all the way far back. It's just very fun. I always learn that talking to colleagues in linguistics, I learn much more new things because I guess you could say our hyperfixation with the language or a field of linguistics, we tend to find more details or more new knowledge that we can share with people. And of course, linguistics is still new knowledge is new. So yeah, feel free to share. We'd love to talk to you guys soon about it. And of course, the reason why I really wanted to spend a long time on this this episode is because I am thinking of introducing more guest speakers on this channel, and I might not have the opportunity to revisit and talk more in detail or in depth about what linguistics is. It'll just be very brief, and we'll just go straight into the conversation of what I'm going to be asking of them and stuff. So yeah, I think that's about it for today's stream.
All right, everyone. We will see you next time.
Yes, so wishing you all a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Stay hydrated, eat something, rest, and I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.